So it is 2 minutes after the hour, and so we'll go ahead and get started. We've got 15 on the call. And what I'll mention, just for anyone who hasn't heard so far, we'll be working in Mural today. And the way to get into Mural is by visiting lwm.events/fishbowl. I'll make sure that the link is available later in the presentation. But this will let you follow along with us as we talk through a map. And then later we'll be doing some group work where we actually get to challenge the map a little bit and talk through the strategic process a bit. I'd like to introduce to you today, I'm joined by two wonderful people who agreed to join me for this experiment. Manish Andankar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, this is Manish. It has been 2 years since, or more than that, since I've been working with Wardley Maps, trying to figure out things, and it's a wonderful journey for me. I work in technical space IT as a technical leader, developer. Actually, we are developers, whatever may be the title, but we develop and we build, and that's wonderful thing to do. But at the same time, we have lots of teams, interaction, strategic gameplays, like in terms of how companies think, what their strategies are. And the last company that I um, left was because my company did not know what to do, and we were all sitting ducks, maintaining some projects, and didn't have any idea or um, any understanding of what our leaders are thinking, what is their vision.
Mm,
And that was the time even when I somehow got introduced to maps, and from there my journey started. So
mm.
I'm so happy and glad that I could interact with you uh, in that subject on that subject.
Yeah, I'm so glad, Manish, that you're here. I've always appreciated the energy that you bring to conversations. And we've also got today with us Alastair Steward. Alastair, you just got a new job, didn't you?
I did. So hi, I'm Alastair. I am in Atlanta, Georgia, in the States. I am an org designer at a consultancy called The Ready, which if you haven't heard of it, you should check it out. I'm definitely still a Wardley mapping novice, but Ben's helping me improve that little by little. So just excited to be here and have a great conversation, and hopefully we can all learn together.
Wonderful. Yeah, and my name is Ben Mosior. I try to run these interesting events around Wardley mapping. You can learn more about it at learnwardleymapping.com. And I kind of consider myself an expert beginner, as in I've been trying to do this, like just get started and get into it for several years, and so that means I've sort of learned how to fail 100 different ways, and so I think that uniquely qualifies me to help you get through those failures yourself more quickly. But what I'd like to especially emphasize today is that in many ways, all of us are beginning with this method. And so we'll talk a little bit about the fishbowl and kind of what the format, how it works and things like that in a moment. But what I'll emphasize is that we're all in this together. And so my call to action here is help each other. There are no real experts. There are only people who have done this longer or less long than others. And I think we're all here to help each other and take the next steps forward. So that's the kind of environment I'm hoping to create, is one that's supportive and allows us all to learn. So with that, I would like to explicitly invite you to tweet with us. If you want to get more into Wardley mapping, there's a lot of stuff out there under the hashtag Wardley Maps. And you can also find the inventor of the technique, Simon Wardley. He's very accessible on Twitter. He's at Swardley. And he invented Wardley mapping and made it Creative Commons available for all of us to build on and work with. So find him on Twitter, and I'll also include little handles at the bottom on every slide if you want to do any tweeting. I'll do this kind of funny thing where I write a note to myself from past me to start a tweet thread. And so what I'll just do here is say, hey everyone, let's get mapping. And I'll do that under Wardley Maps. I'll tag Alastair, and I'll tag Manish, and I'll tag Swardley. And if you run into thoughts and questions during today's session, Obviously, we'll have time to talk about it on this call, but like I kind of would like to and keep talking with you all and seeing what sort of challenges you run into even after the event. And so this is going to be a little experiment to see if we can keep sort of the dialogue moving both during and after the event. So you can find that tweet thread through the hashtag Wardley Maps. All right, we're in the fishbowl. What does that mean? So if a fishbowl is a facilitation technique for enabling a community to learn from the practitioners within it. And so the basic idea, it's this idea from Liberating Structures, which is a collection of facilitation techniques that are available Creative Commons. There's a lot of like interesting ways to help people work together and learn from each other. But the fishbowl it works kind of like this. You have a couple people doing work or having kind of practitioner conversations within the fishbowl. And then outside the fishbowl, you have folks who are just observing and paying attention and kind of listening to the conversation to see how it goes and what people are talking about. And I think the idea is largely to avoid this kind of like expert-centered, like I'm talking at you, telling you what to do, but not showing you what it looks like. I think the true sign of success for a fishbowl would be if what happens inside the fishbowl looks really messy, because we need to talk about that mess and what that feels like and what it looks like. So this is the first time we've ever done a fishbowl through the Learn Wardley Mapping events. And so we're going to learn a lot, I imagine. And so I would sincerely appreciate your patience with us as we learn to do this technique together. But I would also say, speak up and let us know if anything doesn't make sense, if something's not working for you. Always feel welcome to say something in chat. Always feel welcome to unmute yourself. I would ask do that after the initial fishbowl section, but I want to create the opportunity for some dialogue and conversation here as well. So here's today's schedule. We'll do a little bit of the inner fishbowl segment where we'll talk through a map that we made, the three of us, Alastair, Manish, and myself. Or really Manish made the map, but Alastair and I are gonna walk through it together with him and learn a lot about it. And then we'll have an opportunity for group response. And so you'll all get to sort of recall what you saw, talk about what you heard, and actually challenge the map itself and think through the strategic process. And then we'll come back together to do some reactions and reflections. And then if we have time, I'll stay around afterwards for a bit to do some after hours discussion. So that's the general structure of today. So with that, let's get started with the fishbowl. So Manish, Alastair, and I have had this kind of question, right? What do we need in order to effectively work from home for the next 18 months? And we wanted to pay special attention to ideas like how do you facilitate trust between people in the workplace, especially now that you're remote. I think we've seen a couple Twitter threads lately where like some employers are doing time tracking or taking screenshots or taking still images from webcams to see if whether people are working or not. And that sort of reflects the defaults that some feel towards that low trust idea. And so Manish and Alastair went off and did some mapping. We ended up deciding to focus on Manish's map. And so what we'll do is we'll kind of, Alastair and I will have kind of this question and answer session with Manish, where Manish will show us his map and we'll all kind of learn about it together. We'll learn how to read the map, and then we'll maybe talk a little bit about how to think about the strategy that could occur within the map. And so you can follow along with us at lwm.events/fishbowl, but I'll also share my screen so you can see exactly what we're seeing. But if you want to join the mural, you can do that at lwm.events/fishbowl. So with that, I'm going to zoom in on this map, this beautiful map that you made, Manish.
I
And
beg to differ. This is the map made by all three of us, and map is less important than the mapping activity. So I really like the interaction during mapping.
so we were a little selfish with this one, weren't we? We kind of focused on ourselves, right? So I'm kind of curious if you could kind of set the stage. We were asking this question about what would it be like to work from home in the next 18 months? because we have this suspicion that maybe COVID-19 is going to have a longer impact than maybe the more hopeful of us. And I'm just going to ask you to sort of talk us through that point here briefly. So we started with our needs. What did you uncover, Manish? Just kind of walk us through this real quick.
Yeah, so I'll start with the basic, but quickly covering that there in a Wordly map there's an evolution axis. Of course, there are 4 stages where you can map practice, knowledge, data, and um um, one more thing, like I think practice, knowledge, data, and activity.
Yeah.
So even if we are saying Genesis custom product commodity, which is part of activity, we can simultaneously map data, more like knowledge or any other
Yeah, so like
thing.
practices would be like
Yeah, yeah,
novel, emergent, good or best,
correct,
data and
correct,
knowledge,
correct.
etc.
Like ways of working, maybe some best practices that companies may have come up with during this pandemic that could be good practices. So those can
Yeah.
also be the nodes on the map. And there's a visibility y-axis. Actually, it means how visible it is to our end customer or users. So what they do, what they care most about. So if you see the blue ones, those are something that they would care most about. So I kept it up. These are higher level needs that come up. So
Okay.
we can see these nodes as either needs or capabilities or systems or subsystems, anything of that matter, whatever you would like to put it in that context. So um, so there is a value chain, and which boils down till the lower needs, and without the lower needs we cannot satisfy the higher needs, right? For example, without um, say MS Teams, we cannot satisfy the communication as a higher need, or
Got it.
Slack or a Zoom or email. So that's
Yeah.
how the value chain is depicted, and we have to put those things on the evolution axis, considering the fact that whether they are poorly understood or novel and new, which is on Genesis side, on the left side of the map, or completely understood, people know how to use it without being told, it's natural to them.
Oh, yeah, that
Sometimes
makes
kids,
sense. Yeah, so
yeah,
like
sometimes
email, everybody
kids.
roughly understands how to do email, but virtual lunches, what are those?
Never, yeah, what are the practices of that? We never
Yeah.
know until this COVID hit us. So now there will be new ways of figuring out what a good virtual lunch would be, and there would be good practices that would come emerge. So until that become commodity and people will start um, uh, offering it as services to companies, saying, "Oh, we'll offer a good virtual lunch experience to your employees. So we'll be your preferred partner for that,"
Got it.
kind
Yeah,
of thing.
so tell me a little bit about the needs that you chose, because and Alistair, I was kind of wondering too what you were thinking about this as well. So like I see socialization and working relationships, I see context. I don't know what context means here. Like, could you explain a little bit about that? I guess Manish, this is for you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so the context I thought was if we are remote and we want to really work in tandem, we need to know what are the roles, responsibilities, and expectations from each of these members working remotely. They cannot see
Okay.
each other, so of course they don't always know the uh, status of the employee, whether they are away, whether they are focused on some work or not. Because if we are sitting side by side, we keep chatting and stuff like that. So when somebody is away, we know because they sit next to us.
Okay.
So a
Yeah.
lot of this in terms of roadmap context, how we are going to approach uh, this pandemic, what will be our vision or milestone in this pandemic. We cannot just stop the work. Should we work under capacity or 50% capacity? All those things. Context can be
Got it.
anything that can set them up to work from home better.
So if I heard you correctly, the context is kind of the things that maybe Alistair, this reminds me of like the working agreements that you talk about at the Ready. Like how do we know how we're going to work together, especially now that things have changed? and then the roadmaps and milestones, it's like the plans have changed, right? It's not the same anymore. Is that the right way to think about that, Manish, or am I
Yeah,
misunderstanding?
even the expectations when we say, like, there is a lot of distraction when I work at home. My
Mm.
kid comes up all the time, just looks at me and goes away. Oh, my dad is here and stuff. But that doesn't happen when I'm working from office, right? I get the control who disturbs me or not. So in that context, employer understands that working from home could be difficult or challenging for their employees. So they give that wiggle room to those employees.
Got it. Okay, so then we've got communication as well, which you're saying depends on trust. And I noticed you put trust in custom built, and I think I agree with that placement, because I have like, if you were to ask me how to build trust with someone, like I can tell you all the ways to like ruin trust, but I like, it always depends on who, and like who I'm working with, and all these really specific factors that, I mean, every time I build trust, it's like a new expression of trust building. But then I do think about like companies like Alastair's, right? Where they focus a lot on these sort of common ways to create conditions for trust building and things like that. So I was kind of like curious, Alastair, like, what do you think about this placement of trust from left to right? Like, is trust something that's truly custom built every time, or are there maybe some common forms of trust that we're missing out on? Kind of curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that typically, and especially, right now with people transitioning to working from home, I think that it, is either somewhere in either non-existent or Genesis or, custom if it's being built at all.
Hmm.
But to your point, I do think there are interesting ways of kind of moving it to the right and figuring out ways of either building it more quickly or defaulting to trust and having trust be something that you start with and then lose versus something you have to build.
Hmm.
And then what does that do, for that value stream or for other components that rely on it? Because generally, this map is a really interesting mix of extremely tangible, tactical things like, tools and these kinds of things,
Yeah.
and extremely, intangible, invisible, implicit things. And, I think it's very easy right now, it's very easy to default to focusing on like the visible, tactical, tangible things,
Yeah.
and ignore or neglect some of those other elements that are crucial.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and I think it almost creates this gap where we're either focusing on things that are so abstract that we can't actually like grasp them and work with them, or they're so concrete that we are almost saddled to them. We're almost tied to the ways that we used to use them. It's like everybody, when we started with the pandemic situation, everybody was using Zoom exactly the way they were using it before. And I just have to question that. And I'm not, what bothers me the most about that is I'm just not sure how to help people have experiences to connect the abstract to the concrete, and to really get more, to use Zoom or other concrete tools in ways that are more adequately aligned with the real needs that people are going to have on the long term, sort of on the long view of things. Alistair, when you looked at this map the first time, like, did you notice anything that you thought was missing, or is there anything that you kind of wonder about when you look through this kind of stuff?
I definitely wonder about, I think two things come to mind. One is the sort of inherent interconnections between the top four nodes, and how those things actually, and the underlying components and value chains are interconnected as well. Because context is important for communication, and both of those things are important for work and things like that. And then I'm also just interested to kind of dig into the forming, storming, norming, performing box. I think that's a really interesting model to think about in this context.
Yeah, that it's one of those things that I don't know a lot about, and I know that Manish pointed at it as like one of the frameworks we could use to think about the socialization aspect of all this. So we're about the halfway point of the first like sort of fishbowl section. And so I'd kind of like to sort of switch gears and think a little bit about how to challenge the map and how to maybe be a little bit more, maybe probing is the right word. So to the right of the map, I've added this table, and for those of the folks on the sort of outer fishbowl that have attended like a Wardley 101 session, this might look a bit familiar. It's kind of like a mix of Simon's doctrinal principles and some of his gameplay options, right? Like use appropriate methods is about doctrine, reducing bias is doctrine, and so on and so forth. But like refactoring liability, right? Building alliances, these are sort of gameplay options. And I think like it all kind of boils down to, can we take action? Like one of the worst things that I always hear, and I always feel bad whenever this sort of happens, is like we make a map and then we're like, well, now what do we do with it? And it's true that when we model a thing, that's valuable because we start to understand it in new ways. But like the whole point of Simon's strategy cycle is to actually understand the context more and then understand kind of what's happening in it, in order to then take action and get feedback and get better at the strategy part, like the putting the strategy into practice and actually doing it. So, I mean, the three of us are probably going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. And I know for a fact that like my socialization and working relationships have kind of suffered. Even though I was like working from home before, like now it's even worse. Like I can't go to coffee shops anymore, basically, is one of the things that sort of bums me out. But like, I think it's really important for us to sort of examine this closely, and maybe we could explore this weird area of things that are in Genesis. And so one of the things that Simon talks about is using appropriate methods, right? So are we building the things that are in stage 1 and 2 in-house and using agile techniques, and versus like in stage 3-ish using lean sort of approaches, versus stage 4 using Six Sigma and outsourcing? So like we can't really outsource virtual lunches, pep talks, traditional boundaries, and cultural diversity. I mean, I don't think we could ever do that. But let's maybe ask that question though, and maybe challenge that a bit. So the strategic thinking process, right, is you step through the map, you kind of sit with it a little bit, and then you examine the different kinds of opportunities. So like, how might we talk about approaching these kinds of stage 1 activities in order to learn as much as we could about them? Manish, maybe you have some thoughts on this? Like
Yeah, I
virtual
would say
lunches.
when we look at this map, considering you are owner of the company and suddenly your employees are locked at home,
Yeah.
and now you really don't know what to do because there is no way you can throw a party or anything to build the team, like team building efforts, that you
Mm.
could bring them physically together to an event and
Yeah.
break the shackles. And and now if you have new onboarding people, new people who are gonna join the company before the pandemic hit us, you would try to find new ways to give them similar experiences or at least a similar effect of gelling well with the team, right?
Mm. Yeah.
So there may be n number of aspects to virtual lunch, but how effective they are, you will start to think what can be done, what are the best practices that can be good for the company considering the traditional boundary and cultural diversity. Because if the company is in India and there are Indians, there will be different approaches versus when it's in US and there are US folks more there. So depending on the geography, there will be a different approaches on how these traditional boundaries can be drawn and what kind of cultural diversity can be
Yeah.
leveraged to get the team restart their journey of forming again, storming. I know there may be an existing trust level of a team and they continue to work, only that they are working virtually, but then it's different to come to office, talk to them physically, have a coffee with them on the table versus now speaking virtually all the time.
Mm.
And therefore they might find newer ways to do that forming, storming, norming again.
Yeah, that
Because yeah,
I think so. So hearing you talk about that and describe that, I'm actually thinking I might challenge the placement of this a little bit.
yeah.
Because so I'm
So
going back to the strategic options, right? So reducing bias, are we treating this part of our map differently than the rest of the world? Is that valuable, or is it a waste of our resources? I'm looking at virtual lunches, and I'm sitting here going, is this actually stage one? Like, is it true that even before COVID-19, nobody ever did this? And I guess I almost like want to question that a bit.
yeah, I also would be happy to see different perspectives from uh, everyone. That really is it Genesis?
Well, I mean, if someone else has done this before, then maybe we can like learn about it. And like literally, I'm just gonna open up a new tab and just kind of search for it, and see if anything comes up. I like this first article. What is a virtual lunch, and is it as bleak as it sounds? um, okay, so there, I see a couple articles. One on Deloitte. Um, so like I guess I'm starting to have some different ideas about this. I think there are other people doing this now, and it may still be high failure, especially since the top result is talking about how bleak as it is. Although this is clickbait, right? So who knows, right? Is it as bleak as it sounds? Is it as, come on, I hate the clickbait, right? Give me the conclusion. I find it helpful, especially in times of crisis, to find ways to make things feel as normal as possible. Okay, so it's probably not as bleak as it sounds. And maybe like by looking at these tweets and seeing how people are doing it, we might learn about some of the ways that people are doing virtual lunches already. Um, so I'm kind of curious, like maybe that's one of the things we could do to reduce our bias in our first map, is to go do some like I would actually add this to like the list of to-do items. Go research existing virtual lunch approaches, and maybe like see if there are articles about alternatives to virtual lunches to sort of see other options. And I'm just like kind of casually paying attention to some of the chat messages, and people are talking about some alternatives there as well. So like in a way we can just ask and see what other methods are out there. I don't know, like Alastair, what do you think? Am I barking up the wrong tree, or is there more here that maybe you might think about? Because I know you've done more like uh, organizational design kinds of things. So like serendipity is hard to manufacture, especially now. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally what's interesting to me is what virtual lunch is an approach to achieving some particular outcome, right? In terms of a particular type of experience or building relationships in a particular way. And I think what's interesting is that given this enormous change in context, we're trying to figure out new ways of doing it. It's already something we've never been great at virtually. But we're trying to figure out new ways of doing it. And it's also something, to your point, that can be hard to do intentionally because you're sort of manufacturing the serendipity. And so I think what's interesting is I think we end up in a place where we maybe need to be taking sort of a genesis-y approach. Like this is very complex, right? And the things that work in a given context are going to be emergent. But I think it's easy to like box check it, right? And say, okay, well, people are feeling disconnected. So let's have a virtual happy hour, and let's have a Slack bot and these other things, which in some cases will work well, and in some cases really won't work well. But it's sort of like treating it as if that particular kind of need is, I think, more well developed than it is.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And so like kind of one of the things I would want to explore a bit is, can we split this item down into like so there's the technical side of it, right? And like, so socio-technical systems is kind of like the frame I'm using. So the technical side of it is literally like, how do you do it? And like, what tools do you use and all that? But then there's the socio side of it, which is the weirder bit, right? Because even if you have the perfect answer, like just adopt this virtual lunch format, and use like this perfect structure that Deloitte puts together or whatever. making it work in your context for the people that you work with might be a challenge. And so maybe there's value to the implementation, treating implementation as Genesis, because like assuming it's going to fail a bunch, and then you'll have to manage it as like a complex intervention. That seems like something that would be really helpful and interesting. So yeah, like I think we've kind of explored some interesting parts here. There's just so much here that we could dive into. What I'd like to do is shift next into sort of involving the other folks on the call, and giving them the chance to actually do some like hands-on work with this. So we all kind of saw how we did this, right? We looked at the map, and we talked about it, we got familiar with it, and we could even like annotate it, right? I could add my notes here in pink, and I could add sticky notes to the side to keep a track of like to-do lists, stuff like that. I might, if I'm feeling really bold, I might add like text in red or something like that. Like, why don't we try this? You know, and I can do that in Mural, stuff like that. Please forgive my terrible spelling in all caps. So what we actually then did was like, we went through this table. We only covered a couple of the items here. That we talked about using appropriate methods. Like, do we need to really build things in-house? We talked about reducing bias. Like, are we treating this differently than others are treating it? And there are more options here that we could talk about. Hundreds in Simon's weird tables, right, that we've seen in his book. So now what I'd kind of like to shift to is like a more of a group discussion. So I'm going to kind of open up the call a bit, and we're going to form some groups. So here's the idea. So the scribe can take notes about the conversation that happens. The facilitator is just there to create space for people to contribute. And then everyone else in the group kind of just plays the role of challenger, just responding to prompts and talking a little bit, saying what you think. But like, we're in this together. It'll be interesting to see what works and what doesn't. So just try some stuff out. And here's the challenge, right? So we're gonna annotate the map. So in the mural board, there's a space for each group, 3 workspaces, 1, 2, and 3. We're gonna annotate the map with whatever you'd like. You can add sticky notes, you can scroll on it, whatever you'd like to do. And then the second thing is just, what do you notice are options, right? So annotation is about challenge. What would you change about the map and why? And then the second thing is just to have a conversation about options for action. And then we'll come back together and talk a little bit about it. So is everyone clear on that? It may feel a little ambiguous. I am kind of asking you to do a trust fall here, but is anybody uncomfortable taking this trust fall with us?
What's the worst that could happen?
Well, yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, thank you so much for giving this a shot. I'm going to open the Zoom rooms now, and feel free to work in Mural, and we'll check back in as things unfold and see what happens. Thank you all. Well, welcome back, everyone. I want to thank you so much for doing this experiment with us. And in the final couple minutes, part of what comes out of these sessions is part of the recording of the session is kind of like just the really raw discussion that happens, and kind of what we're trying to do is share as much as we can with the folks who haven't done much mapping yet, so that they can see what it really looks like and see how messy it is and see how slow it can be and what the obstacles are and how, like, all that's normal is kind of the message that I'm trying to create as many case studies and examples of as possible. So let's start with George. Would you like to share a little bit about what your group experienced as you walked through this?
A lot of what I put into the took notes on. We also got on the board, but we started off. My fault, but we started off talking about the Tuckman model versus the Drexler-Sibbett model. And the Tuckman model is, I find, not very helpful. And then the yellow stickies pointing towards it, all were proposed solutions, without really considering what the needs were that those solutions were supposed to address. So
Excellent. And this is for the difference between norming, storming, forming, performing. That's the, which model is that?
that's the Tuckman model.
Got it. Okay.
Which
Yeah.
which is an observational model. Many teams go through that, other teams don't. You know, it's not helpful for getting teams to gel, to say, oh, we didn't storm, we got to go back and do that, you know.
I love that. Yeah.
And so Drexler Sibbett, I think, talks a bit more about, you know, what the needs are of the team members and the team as a whole, and the things that you might notice, you know, if people have reached a certain, you know, accomplished a certain stage or not. And they don't have to necessarily take time, because, you know, you could come in with some of this some of this already done. But
Excellent. That's a perfect thing to point at, and I'm really glad that you all got to explore that together. So next, James, would you be able to share a little bit of what your experience was like?
Sure. Yeah, we very quickly went to challenging the map rather than sort of talking about opportunities. I mean, that's what always happens. And so I don't know how many of you can see the Group 2 map, but we made a few observations. One of the ones that generated the most discussion was, do some practices move to the left when they become remotely, or when they have to be done remotely or virtually, right? There was another comment, actually, sorry, earlier, which was that in order for any of these things to be satisfiable, we also have to persuade the rest of the team that, yeah, this is actually a thing we're going to have to develop over, you know, because we have to work remotely over the course of 18 months. And so there's a sort of meta trust that you actually need to you're actually going to need to sustain these new practices.
Wow.
Another thing that came up was about this idea of competency. Again, like if some practices are moving to the left in some, or seem to move to the left, do we want to map your competency in being able to do a practice as a need, right? And does that competency have components that satisfy it? Let me see. Yeah, and I just sort of broke down that idea of things moving to the left a bit more to say the components that make up a remote version of the practice are less mature than the ones that make up the face-to-face version of the practice. So it's not as if a practice is just moving to the left. The point is that the remote practice is different from the normal one, and so we could actually map the components of the remote practice against the components of the face-to-face practice and see the delta and see which pieces are the ones that are that much less mature.
Oh, this is fascinating. Yeah, I kind of like the sort of story that's coming out of this. Like George explored the different framing of the team formation part of this, and your group explored kind of how does the nature of the thing change, and what components actually are different from the remote version versus the in-person version. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Alan, could you share a little bit about Group 3? What did you all experience as you kind of explored this together?
Yeah, sure. So I wasn't a very good scribe because we were a small group. We were a small group, and I talked too much. But I think we started off with the same challenge to the Tuckman-Drexler model, but then I kind of we kind of got into the more foundational side, like went a level up to the needs, and talking about where are these all the things that we see. I could see there's a psychological need. I think we broke that down. Sort of security, safety needs, which is physical health and psychological safety, which seemed a bit foundational in the sense that pyramid of needs, hierarchy of needs. You're not going to be doing your best work if you're not secure. But then we started getting into how we would represent those. Would they be connected lower down on the Y, higher up on the Y? What's the relationship to the other needs? How does that work? A little bit of a debate around that. And then we started moving towards, well, to make any sense of this, do we build up a persona that we can just have a common framework to talk around. We kind of landed on an individual consultant. We're all in sort of consultancy space. Landed on an individual consultant, just convenient, and that led us to start thinking about a lot about that persona's life right now, what kind of things they're going to be experiencing, stuff around they're going to be using a lot of these tools. They're all going to be very new to them. They're going to be context switching. They're going to be working with clients who are fighting fires now, but they're also going to have to start thinking about the future, and all their clients who are having a crisis now in a kind of Kynefin way have been thrown into chaos instantly, and this person's going to be looking at they're going to be looked to bring their clients out of that chaos, but they don't know anything more particularly. So there's a certain pressure there. The best thing you can do is probably be honest, but there's pressure. There's a lot of learning that would have to be happening. And we talked a lot about the persona and what they're going to be experiencing, but we didn't get to making any impact on the map and what that would do to the map. So there'd probably be a lot of stuff like underneath, and that would change how you work and how you relate to teams, and what kind of work you're doing now and planning for the future. But we didn't get to apply that, and therefore didn't get to any actions.
Yeah, awesome. This is exactly what I was hoping for, and actually more than I was hoping for, frankly. Like I just love hearing the explorations that all of the groups did and what came out of that. And it's just so hard to fit like a really solid exploration into so little time. So now, but like this is just awesome. So we're gonna kind of switch gears here. Like now the thing is done, and we're gonna sort of start the after hours conversation a bit.